Hello and welcome to the NextPowerUp review of Cross of the Dutchman. This is a hack and slash game by Triangle Studios, and if you remember me talking about it on our Saturday Next Week in Gaming article, I was hoping for this game to be more of a story-led hack and slash as opposed to an old school loot 'em up RPG sort of thing. After the game released, the day after the game released, they decided to amend the genre of the game and no longer classify it as an RPG, which I don't think was correct. I think it still is an RPG, but they removed that just to enforce the fact that this game was in fact a storyline-led hack and slash as opposed to a full-blown RPG with loot systems and leveling up, which it doesn't have. So we'll jump right into the game and straight off into the video options menu, and as you'll probably notice, there isn't one. You simply have a video options menu. It does have 4K support, which for some strange reason will absolutely rinse my GPU. I did manage to get 60 frames most of the time, but there are occasions where it isn't quite enough. But on 1080p, those weird performance issues don't really exist a whole lot, so it's actually pretty good. You don't need very much computer power to run the game at all. It's just on 4K, it's a bit crazy. I have, again, had to put the sound to ridiculously low, and we'll continue where we left off. I am currently on Chapter 6, which is just over halfway through the game, and Chapter 6 is, as you can see, the exact moment when I unlock the sword for Pierre. Pierre Donia is the main character in this game. He's a real person that turned into a folklore legend in the old Frisian days, and he was kind of a badass rebel leader and a pirate, but he was pretty good, pretty cool guy who got over-exaggerated an awful lot throughout history. And now that I've unlocked the sword, you can see the slightly more awesome version of the combat. The fist combat is still pretty good though, very very punchy. They've got the feel of the combat right. Combat is very simplistic, but the feel, the punch, the size of the character has definitely been developed very well. And once you unlock the sword, if you think that he's strong with just his fists, you should see him attacking mass enemies with this sword, because he just decimates a lot of them. Before we carry on with the main storyline, we're on chapter 5. There's only 4 more chapters to go. There are only 2 traders. The first trader is one of these guys. Here you can unlock fist power attack skills. You already have 1 power attack unlocked, which is keybinded to 1 for fists. So 1 through to 4 is for your fists, and then 5 through to 8 is for your sword. Oh no, sorry. 1 through to 4 is your fists, and then you scroll down to switch your weapon, either between sword and fist, and then that 1 through to 4 will select these skills. As you can see, I haven't actually unlocked any of the melee skills apart from door kick, and that's because I've completed the game before. These 2 sucked, and door kick was awesome, so I decided to stick with that for the fist and just not waste my money, and instead spent my money at the other trader. So you can buy all of these, and if I remember correctly, swing. Was it swing? I think it was swing was the best one. So I've got my sword equipped by pressing the scroll wheel, and your main attack is that one. And then you can switch with 1 through to 4, but obviously swing is number 3. Yeah, that's the one. And that's the awesome skill. And then you can scroll down and then select 1 through to 4, and you can see that that thing at the top left hand corner is actually changing colour. It's not a very good representation of what skill is selected. I would have liked for them to have put in a little bit more effort about the way skills are selected. And personally, for me, scroll wheel down to switch your equipment is odd. It's not really a very good button rather, and the keybinds aren't really explained at the start of the game either. The game doesn't really have much of a tutorial. The first 2 missions are a sort of tutorial trial by fire, basically. And no keybinds are actually told to you, so tab is for your mini-map, and mouse control pretty much does everything. This second trader is a guy that will unlock base percentage increases to health and stamina. You have your health bar and your stamina bar. I've maxed these out because to me they're way more important than skills. You'll fare a hell of a lot better in combat if you have more health and stamina than if you have a silly skill that does slightly different types of damage and different AoE damage. So we'll carry on with the story here. As you can probably tell, the graphics are a little bit simplistic. It's very much DS type graphics, but it's not too bad. And just then you would have noticed a small amount of stutter. That's quite prevalent throughout the game for some reason. It It happened to me 3 times in my first playthrough, and it's probably happened to me twice since on my second playthrough. I've completed the game twice already, and this is the third, just because of benchmarking and stuff like that. As you saw, I opened those chests. That is your reward for exploring the area. These chests give you a fair amount of gold, and the developers said that there's up to 6 hours of gameplay if you search everywhere and unlock all the chests, but that is a bit of an exaggeration because I managed to go through the game the first time, not exploring at all, unlocking a couple of chests, unlocking almost every weapon skill and every health upgrade and only one stamina upgrade. This time I've been through and unlocked as many chests as I could possibly find, smashed all of the barrels, and only unlocked the certain weapon skills I know are good and the others are bad, and just spent all the money on passive stamina and health increases. So basically the maps are quite large, but there's a lot of objects in the way, which I'll show you as we go through this story. So we'll progress through this, talk to this guy, and then hopefully we can show you some combat and some exploration as well. The game is split up into about 6 different areas, and you'll find yourself going to each of these areas about 3 times each throughout the entire game. There's a lot of back and forth, which is a bit... luckily you only have to do it for 2.5 hours because that's how long it takes to complete the game, but going back and forth is a bit of a pain in the ass. However, this is a story-led game, and the story is actually pretty good. Once I completed the game, I was actually relatively fascinated because the game leaves you at the end of the beginning of, the Cross of the Dutchman story. So it's definitely worth. So there's a hell of a lot of punch involved. AI isn't that great at all. There's a lot of... It's a very simple game, extremely simple game. You can tell that not just in the graphics, but there's no voice actors. There's not really a great deal of anything. There's just a few very basic concepts. Except the game as a core is designed... I'll just skip this. Is designed to tell you the story of Pierre Donia, which it does very well. It's just that on the way there is stuttering. The enemy AI is not so great, and it's very short. And basically, in every piece of positive you can find, there is also a negative to offset that, which is a little bit disappointing. However, I think if the game's and developers' main objective is to, introduce people to Frisian folklore, they've done a damn good job, because I never would have checked otherwise about this guy. I've learnt a lot of things, and I think they've done a pretty good job in advertising some of this folklore. Combat is great. There are some stealth mechanics. Well, there's no stealth mechanics, but there is stealth, and which is also annoying. There are a lot of stealth parts in the game, but they're annoying because, yes, it's good that it mixes up the gameplay a lot, and the gameplay throughout the entire game is totally varied. One moment you'll be punching people to death, another moment you'll be collecting things, you'll be wandering off to try and find people, you'll be fighting some of your friendly people to bring them on side, you'll be collecting gold to go and get stuff, and then another moment you'll do stealth, and then you'll be defending and trying to get supplies. So there's a lot of variation in gameplay. It's just that you often end up having to run through the same areas over and over again, and unfortunately the stealth is interesting but bad at the same time, because there's no light radius, there's no enemy sight markers or anything like that, so you're literally going into stealth blind, and you just have to sort of make an educated guess on what the stealth is actually like, which is a bit disappointing. I can understand them not wanting to spend too much time developing stealth because the game isn't primarily based on it, but they have put a lot of stealth elements in there, so it would have been worth, just giving the enemies a sight radius, so that it made it easier for new players to get into it. Another one of the issues is that nothing is ever explained ever, and the game is... Don't be surprised that the simple graphics, that the game is not challenging, because at times it is. The general concept of this is that you are one very large man who's very strong, and you're going against an exceptionally large militia force of Saxons. And the game is very quick to outline that very small detail to you by sending you off to rescue people and then telling you, hey, you've got to beat 20 Saxons with your bare hands and try not to die before you've ever unlocked any health things. So it's actually quite challenging. Very, very challenging, in fact. But even if you fail various challenges frequently, the game still only took me absolute maximum of 3 hours to complete, even looking for chests and things like that. And only now, at chapter 6, which is 2/3 through the game, is this guy telling me I can buy weapon upgrades. So it's quite short, and you get the sword so late in the game that you often have to deal with just using your fist for such a long time. I just feel like you're missing out on an awful lot of really awesome gameplay because, you know, punching people around in combat with fists is fun for the first 30 minutes to an hour maybe, but for the second hour it's very good timing when they put the sword in, because if it was any longer before I got the sword and then it was half an hour later that the game was over, that probably would have irritated me a hell of a lot. So I think putting it in where you get your sword, where it is at the moment, is okay. It would have preferably been a little bit earlier. That could have been resolved, of course, if they just made the game longer. And you know, the game could have been longer. I mean, Pierre Dogna's story by no means is just limited to the point at which the game ends, which I won't spoil for you in case you don't know the story, but you should read up on it anyway. He goes on for a long time after that because he was a pretty damn good pirate. He stole a lot of ships in the history books, and he was a real pain in the ass. He caused a lot of problems. And his story, you know, spans many years and many different wars. Here's another one of these chests. And so they could have made a very large game about his life, but they didn't. So here we go. Smash that. That is just fantastic. That right there is the reason this game made me like it so much. I mean, there's a lot of negatives surrounding the game. There's also a lot of positives, but the combat itself, the punch of the combat, is spot on. Absolutely spot on. I mean, there's an awful lot of hack and slash games which fail to do the physicsy feel of combat, and that in themselves makes them bad, makes them, you know, difficult to sell because not many people like them. I mean, there's an awful lot of games that lack punch. I remember one game, Grim Dawn, for example, grenades and things like that, they had a lot of punch, and that was what made the game feel good. So despite all of its shortfalls, being short and having a few underdeveloped stealth mechanics, quite repetitive in the areas that you often find yourselves visiting, the combat itself, I kind of wish they made a separate game just for the sake of implementing. Whoever developed the combat in this game obviously knew what they were doing, knew what they were aiming for, and got it spot on. So I do really like that. The combat itself is great. Apart from the power attack skills and things like that, some of them are definitely a bit more useless than the rest, and they're also a little bit slow to wind up. But the combat itself, the core combat and the core story is fantastic. And if you're looking for a game that is, you know, no frills, no stupid 5 different colours of items that you've got to farm for hours and hours and hours for, and you just want to be told a story, this is an excellent way to go. I mean, obviously there are quality story-told RPGs like Pillars of Eternity and things like that, but nothing fits this price bracket with this kind of gameplay. It does have very limited replay value. There's little to no reason to replay the game, but it's a relatively cheap game. The combat is good, and you know, you learn something. I mean, I learned an awful lot, not just by playing the game, but by reading up on the history afterwards as well. And it is genuinely a fascinating piece of history. So overall, the game is not the best. It's not fantastic or amazing or anything like that, but core concepts are definitely there, and I'd quite like to see more games focus less on just making you farm for items and farm for all sorts of things, and just focus on 2 or 3 very core things. I think if this game was, you know, if it had the ship takeover thing, had the excellent base of combat, had the excellent core storyline, and maybe they developed out the stealth mechanics so that, you know, it sort of emphasize the fact that you were a rebel leader and that you had to focus on surprise as opposed to numbers, which you just don't have against a heavily armed militia force like the Saxons, then it would have been a genuinely amazing game. It is by no means a terrible game. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from buying it because I think that what you learn in the game is actually relatively good, and I respect it and like it for that. I respect that the developers have said we want to make a game about the story and not about the loot or about, you know, gigantic demons coming from hell, which you obviously understand where that's coming from. But even the character development, like this guy, it's very simplistic graphics, but they've done an exceptionally good job at very little things, which is quite interesting. And this is one of my favourite parts. This is the part where you realise that how over-exaggerated Pierre Dogne's history has been. Is this man has just put his sword down. He's now faced with 5 men, and you're now going to pick up a farm tool and beat them with it. Look at that. Look at this. Oh, what? I didn't finish. Anyway. Yeah, and so the storyline is explained. It's not. I would have liked a bit of narration as well. The storyline is very good. However, this part needs to be narrated. I feel like this game would teeter from above average good to relatively good if they just employed one person with a nice mellow voice to speak over these parts of little comic book strips explaining the story and things like that. I think if they did that, then they would probably make me forget about all of the negatives in the game. In terms of system performance, it's pretty good. FPS is capped at 60 and there's no VSync. Obviously, there's no tweaking options. But, you know, I think this game definitely has a market, and that market would appreciate it. Obviously, there are those that are absolute hardcore Diablo and Path of Exile fans, and I can understand that. I played a lot of Diablo, probably thousands of hours of Diablo 2 and hundreds of hours of Path of Exile, if not more. But I can still most definitely appreciate this game, and yeah, I have an awful lot of respect for the developers for it. I just wish that it's so. I like it enough that I wish that there was more than 2.5 or 3 hours of gameplay. So yeah, I would probably recommend this to people who are looking for a casual story-led game, as opposed to a game that they're going to sink 4 hours of every evening farming on. So anyhow, I'll leave it at there. Obviously, you can see the full review and the performance analysis articles in the comment section below, and of course, check out Overclockers UK if you're looking for some additional hardware to help you run these games. Although this game you could probably run it on a vending machine, to be fair. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on Saturday and next Thursday.